So now we're going to come back to the UK and to excess mortality statistics because the ONS pushed this out on X earlier, saying deaths registered in England and Wales in week 6 were 2% lower than the expected number, brackets 251 fewer deaths. Find out more about our new method for estimating the number of excess deaths, replacing the use of 5-year averages. And they have produced a nice little blog. So let's look and see what they had to say on their blog. They said the chosen methodology uses statistical models to obtain the expected number of deaths in each period. Importantly, from this approach, moves away from averages drawn from raw numbers and instead uses age-specific mortality rates. This month, ONS will publish a methodological article detailing the new approach. This will contain estimates for periods before and during the pandemic using this approach, and will compare with estimates from the current methodology. So that's what they're saying. But let's have a look at this little estimation that they've published now, which shows the methodology that they use. Now, I'm not going to show on screen the methodology from this, but if you want to go and look at it for yourselves, have a look for estimating excess deaths in the UK, methodology changes, February 2024. But I'm going to show this table from it because this is what they are showing, the comparison of annual numbers of excess deaths estimated by the current and new methodologies, UK 2020 to 2023. And you can see that the new method largely finds that there were fewer excess deaths than previously. Now, if we just at the bottom of this look at some totals, what they're saying is that using the old method, that from 2020 to 2023, there were 216,103 excess deaths. Of course, many of those being attributed to COVID-19. And using the new method, there were only 184,941 excess deaths. And so that is a reduction over that period of 31,162 deaths. Now, you'll notice that particularly for 2023, that seems to be having a fairly large impact because for 2023 at least, the old way of counting would have counted 31,500 deaths, and the new method of counting is just under 11,000 deaths. So you can decide for yourselves whether this new methodology is the correct one or not. I'd be interested to see whether what various academics think of this. But the point here is, of course, that what we saw was the manipulation of excess mortality figures by the ONS during the course of the so-called pandemic anyway, because they adjusted the time period that the 5-year average was calculated over in the course of that period of time. So, well, I'd be interested to get, I'm looking forward to hearing what various other people have to say about this. In the meantime, of course, we've got the pandemic treaty and all the associated material with that. And first of all, I want to bring this on screen. This is a briefing document with respect to a paper which has been published called REPPARE. And this is entitled Rational Policy Over Panic. The evidence base of the pandemic preparedness agenda does not support the current urgency. And it says here, international health institutions are emphasizing an urgency to prioritize prevention and response to pandemics. Pandemic risk is characterized as an existential threat to humanity and is being used to justify proposed amendment to the international health regulations and a new legally binding pandemic agreement. This agenda is supported by unprecedented annual financial requests for over $10 billion in new overseas development assistance and over $26 billion in LMIC's investment, with over $10 billion additional for One Health interventions. The World Health Assembly will vote on the World Health Organization instruments in May-June 2024. So I'd like to welcome David Bell to the program, who's one of the authors of this report. And we'll just look at a couple more graphics from this summary document in a second. But David, welcome to the program. Tell us what the motivation was for this paper in the first place.
Produced by the REPPARE project at the University of Leeds. The motivation is just to get an honest look at the the evidence base for the the urgency and the scope of pandemic risk. We're hearing, as you said, that from the World Bank, WHO, G20, that there's an exponential increase in risk, that there's an existential threat to humanity. We've gone systematically through the databases that these organizations are using and through their reports and the citations, and essentially what they're citing and the database they're using don't show this at all. There's an increase in reported outbreaks over the last 60, 70, 80 years, which fits very well with the fact that we can detect them now. We've invented PCR, point of care, rapid tests, etc. So we can detect things that we couldn't detect in the past. Over the last 10 to 20 years, there's a reduction in mortality and in the number of outbreaks in their own databases. So what they're telling governments and what they're telling the public is very different than the actual risk that their own data shows, which essentially has surprised us. The difference between reality and their wording is so great.
Well, let me bring this table on screen then, because this is from your document showing events considered by the G20 to be major outbreaks, 2000 to 2020, and the mortality associated with each of those. I take it these are World Health Organization statistics. So that then brings into question why the urgency for this massive global infrastructure to be established.
Well, the table is interesting, Mike. So it's the two left-hand columns that are provided by the G20's report, and the one on the right is the best numbers that we could put on that from the literature. The scholarship of the report is such that they don't even give these numbers, but they characterize this as major outbreaks occurring every few years for the last 20 years. So we have on that table COVID at the top, which it appears is not a natural outbreak. I think that's fairly well accepted now. And then you have the swine flu, H1N1, which was far less lethal than the normal seasonal flu, about a quarter of the normal mortality in 2009. After that, for all these outbreaks, you have a total of about 26,000 deaths, and most of those are Ebola, which is confined to West Africa. So this is the sort of information they're giving. 26,000 deaths is about 5 days of tuberculosis in the world in terms of mortality. But this is all the major outbreaks that they can come up with for the last 20 years. So it's really illustrating that this is why we hear about disease X from the WHO, because if you look at actual figures, the burden is so small that it would not justify the sort of money that they're asking for.
Yes, and so that particular graphic there that we just saw, World Health Organization identifies 9 priority diseases for research and development in an emergency context. This includes COVID-19 and a hypothetical outbreak, disease X. Of the 7 other diseases, only Ebola virus has caused an outbreak of over 10,000 deaths in recorded history. And so then you've got to ask, why are they pursuing this so strongly as they are? Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of money on the table here. There's tens of billions of dollars. It's an unprecedented amount for public health. And there is a whole industry that's being built around this. So we already have thousands of people, global health, public health people in countries and in international organizations whose salaries are depending on this getting through. So we're building essentially an industry that is self-perpetuating. It's going to have very intensive surveillance. They will find threats because that's normal. You can find viral variants if you look for them, which is why we're finding more outbreaks now. And then, they're putting a mechanism in place through the WHO, the International Health Regulation Amendments and the WHO agreement that's being negotiated, where they can lock down countries, lock down regions, produce a 100-day vaccine, and then use that to give people their freedom back. And it's generating huge numbers of salaries and work for public health workers, and it's generating huge profits, or it will, for pharma, as we saw it did in COVID-19. So I think primarily it's a business-driven, money-driven issue, but it's got to a point where we have international organizations who are now grossly misrepresenting the actual risk to countries in order, I think, to get this money.
David, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. And just to finish this off, I mean, where do people find the full report? And in fact, I mean, what would you like to see happen with that full report at this stage?
Well, we would very much like countries, legislators, politicians, and so on to look at this and to read it objectively. It's the report it goes in detail through the reports of these organizations. It's a factual report. It gives the actual risk, and then we need to weigh. Pandemics will happen, outbreaks happen. Of course we should be prepared, but we need to do this proportionate to other health issues, and that's what's not happening now. So the report can be found at the University of Leeds. I think we can put it on your website, hopefully, Mike, so that people can find the actual report.
Yeah, we'll have that in the notes under this news. Okay, David, thank you very much for joining us. James, maybe I could just invite you to comment on this just for a few seconds. What are your thoughts on this type of report and the justification for what we're going to be talking about in more detail in a few minutes with you?
With work on this, and the two reports have a similarity. If you don't like the data, change the data, and have a new method of estimating data. Have a lie that says that there's a problem when there isn't a problem. And this is what we're dealing around the world with, inability to access data. When I have come to look at this in my mind, whenever I hear officials talk about misinformation, it triggers in my head that what they're dealing with is people like UK Column or David or myself or everyone else presenting the missing information that they don't want people to see. And so, the facts are much different than they would like us to believe. And as long as they can hide them or manipulate them, they can attempt to change public opinion. And so, I will do everything in my power to spread the word on Dr. Bell's report. And it's going to actually mirror what I'm about to say with what we're talking about with the WHO. Read the original source documents, get down to the original data. Whenever you hear somebody say something, the definition of that is hearsay. If it's interesting, go down and dig for the actual core documents. And that's what I hope to talk about with what we had planned.
Okay.